Jason Collins had always cherished the tranquility of his lakefront property. Nestled amidst rolling hills and dense woodlands, the shimmering expanse of water stretched out before his home, a private haven where he could fish, boat, and unwind in solitude. It wasn't just a personal retreat, it was his lake. Years ago, when the previous owner decided to sell, Jason seized the opportunity to purchase not only the charming cottage but also the entire body of water and the surrounding land. He never advertised this fact, choosing instead to let the local homeowners association, HOA, believe it was a communal area. The lake had always been a source of solace for Jason. Each morning, he would sip his coffee on the porch, watching the mist rise from the water's surface as birds chirped in the distance. Evenings were spent casting a line from his modest pontoon boat, the gentle lapping of waves providing a soothing soundtrack to his thoughts. He relished the serenity, the sense of ownership, and the connection to nature that the lake provided. So, when Jason received a sternly worded letter from the HOA demanding he move his boat because it was violating community aesthetics, he was more amused than annoyed. The letter, printed on crisp, official-looking stationery, claimed that the boat was parked on community property, obstructing access for other residents. It also mentioned that Jason was disrupting the fishing club's scheduled activities. The tone was authoritative, bordering on condescending, and it concluded with a veiled threat of fines and further action if he failed to comply. Jason chuckled as he read the letter, shaking his head at the audacity. He had always maintained a cordial, if distant, relationship with the HOA. He paid his dues on time, attended the occasional meeting, and generally kept to himself. He had no interest in the politics and power plays that often characterized such organizations. But this letter was different. It was a direct challenge to his autonomy, an assertion of authority over something that was unequivocally his. Deciding not to respond immediately, Jason opted to wait and see what the HOA's next move would be. A week later, he found a bright orange notice taped to his boat, a citation for non-compliance, threatening daily fines and further action. The notice was affixed with a heavy-duty adhesive clearly intended to make a statement. Jason peeled it off carefully, folding it neatly and placing it alongside the original letter. He was beginning to feel a mix of irritation and amusement. That evening, Jason decided to attend the HOA meeting. Held in the community clubhouse, the meetings were typically sparsely attended, with only the most zealous residents showing up to discuss landscaping guidelines and noise ordinances. Jason arrived early, taking a seat near the back of the room. The clubhouse was a modest building with beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and a faint smell of coffee and disinfectant. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows facing a long table where the board members sat. The board, led by a smug chairperson named Marjorie Dawson, wasted no time addressing the issue. Marjorie was a petite woman in her late 50s, with meticulously styled silver hair and a penchant for pastel-colored suits. She exuded an air of self-importance, her every movement calculated to convey authority. Beside her sat the other board members, Tom, a retired accountant with a perpetually furrowed brow, Linda, a former schoolteacher known for her sharp tongue, and Raj, a soft-spoken engineer who rarely spoke unless prompted. "Mr. Collins," Marjorie began, her voice dripping with authority, "you are in clear violation of our community rules. Your boat must be relocated within the week, or will be forced to levy daily fines." She paused, allowing her words to hang in the air, as if expecting immediate compliance. Jason smiled, leaning back in his chair. "I think you're mistaken," he replied calmly. "I'll take care of it." The board exchanged satisfied glances, interpreting his response as acquiescence. They thought they'd won. But Jason knew something they didn't. Jason Collins awoke to a crisp dawn light streaming through the wide, floor-to-ceiling windows of his lakeside study, casting golden pools of radiance upon the mahogany bookshelves and illuminating the weathered leather folder resting on the center of his antique oak desk. The folder had sat there for years, a quiet testament to his ownership of the lake and the surrounding property, undisturbed yet ever-present. Today, as the faint echo of the HOA's threats lingered in his mind like an unwelcome melody, he reached for it with deliberate purpose, his fingers tracing the edges of the thick, embossed leather before pulling it open to reveal the meticulously drafted deed. The document, yellowed by time but otherwise pristine, bore his name in elegant script alongside detailed legal language that explicitly granted him full and unchallenged ownership of the lake, its shoreline, and all associated rights to water-based activities. The HOA's assumptions about communal property were not merely flawed, they were outright baseless. The lake wasn't public. It wasn't community property. It was his entirely and without compromise. As he held the deed in his hands, the weight of his investment and legacy settled over him like a comforting cloak, a reminder of the deliberate steps he had taken years ago to secure a slice of serenity amidst the chaos of suburban politics. He remembered the day he had acquired the lake, the negotiations with the elderly landowner who had been ready to retire, and the quiet exhilaration he felt when the deal was sealed with a firm handshake and the transfer of papers. That moment had marked not just a purchase but a profound shift in his life, an assertion of independence. A deliberate move away from the noisy, contentious entanglements of the neighborhood, and a silent but resolute declaration that this lake, with its glistening surface and tranquil ambience, was his sanctuary. He had watched over it, maintained it, and respected its natural beauty, always aware of its significance yet choosing not to flaunt his ownership, preferring instead the quiet dignity of privacy. But now, the HOA's encroachment threatened that dignity. They had issued their demands, arrogantly asserting control over something they did not and could not own, their ignorance evident in every smugly written word of the citations taped to his boat. It wasn't just about the boat, it was about the principle. The violation of his rights, the audacity of the association to dictate terms to him as if he were an unruly tenant rather than the rightful owner. Jason's decision was swift. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Peter Hensley's name, a seasoned attorney whose calm voice had provided reassurance through various legal matters over the years. When Peter answered, his tone was warm and familiar, but Jason wasted no time with pleasantries, diving directly into the situation at hand. Familiar, but Jason wasted no time with pleasantries, diving directly into the situation at hand. He read the HOA's letter aloud, his voice steady yet tinged with a quiet indignation. As Jason spoke, he imagined Peter sitting in his own wood-paneled office, probably leaning back in his leather chair, a bemused smile tugging at his lips. Sure enough, when Jason finished reading, Peter let out a low chuckle, the sound of it carrying both amusement and a hint of incredulity. "They don't have a leg to stand on," Peter said confidently. "You own that lake, Jason. They can't fine you for using your own property, nor can they dictate how you use it. Their fishing club's activities are effectively trespassing. We'll make that clear." The reassurance, though expected, settled Jason's rising tension, allowing him to exhale slowly, a weight lifting from his chest. But he wasn't content with quiet vindication. He wanted a formal response that left no room for ambiguity. Inspired, he sat down at his desk, drawing a fresh sheet of heavyweight stationery from the drawer and selecting his favorite fountain pen, its brass nib gleaming in the morning light. The letter he composed was brief but firm, each word carefully chosen to convey authority and finality. He addressed it directly to the HOA board, stating in unequivocal terms that he was the legal owner of the lake and that any further attempts to fine or restrict him were not only invalid but constituted harassment. He enclosed a copy of the deed, highlighted and annotated for clarity, and concluded the letter with a polite but unmistakable directive. The HOA must immediately cease their fishing club's use of his private property. He signed it with a flourish, the ink drying smoothly against the paper's textured surface. Once sealed in a matching envelope, he drove to the HOA office, a low-slung building near the community clubhouse, where he hand-delivered the letter to the startled receptionist. He imagined the scene that would unfold when Marjorie Dawson, the HOA's imperious chairperson, opened the envelope and discovered the irrefutable truth staring back at her. Jason could almost hear the stammering explanations, the hurried consultations, the dawning realization that their assumptions had crumbled. Driving back home, he felt an unfamiliar lightness in his step, a sense of control returning as he envisioned the next chapter of this unfolding drama. He knew this wasn't the end. The HOA would resist, perhaps try to negotiate or spin the narrative to save face. But he was ready. The deed in his hands wasn't just a document. It was a shield, a declaration of his rights, and a symbol of his unwavering commitment to protect what was his. As he returned to his lakefront property, he paused at the edge of the dock, gazing out over the water as the afternoon sun painted rippling patterns of light across the surface. The boat rocked gently against its moorings, waiting for him. He smiled, knowing that this time the boat would stay exactly where he wanted it. The lake, after all, belonged to him, and no letter, no citation, no self-important HOA could change that truth. The atmosphere in the HOA boardroom was tense as Marjorie Dawson, the long-standing president of the Lakeview Homeowners Association, paced back and forth, the letter from Jason Collins clutched tightly in her hand. The board members sat around the polished oak table, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. The contents of Jason's letter had thrown them into disarray. Marjorie had always prided herself on her meticulous management of the community. Under her leadership, the HOA had maintained strict guidelines to preserve the neighborhood's aesthetic and order. The lake, a central feature of the community, had long been considered a shared amenity, with the HOA overseeing its use and maintenance. The fishing club, a cherished institution among residents, held regular events there, fostering camaraderie and community spirit. However, Jason's letter challenged the very foundation of their assumptions. He claimed sole ownership of the lake, presenting a deed that, if legitimate, meant the HOA had been operating under a false premise for years. The implications were staggering. If the lake was indeed private property, the HOA had no authority over it, and their enforcement actions against Jason were not only baseless but potentially unlawful. Marjorie convened an emergency meeting, summoning the HOA's legal counsel to verify the authenticity of Jason's deed. The lawyer, after a thorough examination, confirmed its validity. The lake was, without a doubt, Jason Collins's private property. The realization sent shockwaves through the board. The board members voiced their concerns. The fishing club's activities, the community events held by the lake, and the general assumption of communal ownership were all now in question. Residents would be outraged to learn they had been trespassing, albeit unknowingly. The HOA's credibility was at stake, and Marjorie's leadership was under scrutiny. In a bid to mitigate the situation, Marjorie proposed reaching out to Jason to negotiate a resolution. Perhaps they could establish a formal agreement compensating him for continued community access to the lake. The board agreed, and a meeting was scheduled. At the meeting, Jason was composed and resolute. He listened to Marjorie's proposals but remained firm in his stance. "This isn't a negotiation," he stated calmly. "The lake is my property. The fishing club's activities on it are over." Marjorie attempted to reason with him, highlighting the community's reliance on the lake and the potential fallout from its sudden inaccessibility. But Jason was unmoved. He emphasized the years of unauthorized use of his property and the recent attempts to penalize him for utilizing his own land. The board members, recognizing the gravity of the situation, sat in silence. The meeting concluded with no agreement reached. Jason left, leaving the HOA to grapple with the consequences of their oversight. In the days that followed, the HOA faced backlash from residents. The fishing club was disbanded and community events by the lake were canceled. Marjorie's leadership was questioned, and the board was forced to re-evaluate its governance practices. Jason, meanwhile, enjoyed the newfound peace and privacy of his lake, free from unauthorized use and unwarranted interference. With the deed firmly in hand and the HOA's claims thoroughly debunked, Jason Collins embarked on a mission to reclaim his sanctuary. The first step was to establish clear boundaries. He commissioned the installation of prominent private property signs around the lake's perimeter, each bearing his name and a stern warning against unauthorized access. To further solidify his stance, he erected a security gate at the sole access point to the boat ramp, ensuring that only those with explicit permission could enter. The impact was immediate and palpable. The HOA's fishing club, once a staple of weekend activity, found itself without a venue. Members were left scrambling, their gear unused, their gatherings disbanded. The community buzzed with the news. Some residents expressed outrage, decrying Jason's actions as selfish and disruptive. Others, however, saw it as a long overdue assertion of individual rights against an overreaching HOA. Jason, for his part, relished the newfound tranquility. The lake, once a bustling hub of activity, now returned to its serene origins. He spent his days fishing, kayaking, and simply enjoying the peace that had been absent for so long. Occasionally, he invited close friends for private outings, sharing the beauty of the lake without the interference of unwelcome guests. The HOA, reeling from the public relations debacle, retreated into silence. Marjorie Dawson, once the formidable president, faced mounting criticism from residents and eventually stepped down. The association, now leaderless and chastened, ceased its attempts to control the lake, focusing instead on internal reforms and rebuilding trust within the community. In the end, Jason's steadfast defense of his property rights not only restored his personal peace, but also served as a catalyst for broader change. The community, once dominated by an overbearing HOA, began to reevaluate its governance, striving for a more balanced and respectful approach. And Jason, ever the quiet guardian of the lake, continued to enjoy his sanctuary, a testament to the power of standing firm in the face of unwarranted authority.